This podcast is brought to you by ProLongevity, the award-winning 8-week program that can transform the lives of people with pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and many other lifestyle-related illnesses. Founded by Graham Phillips, the pharmacist who gave up drugs.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the ProLongevity podcast. And I have with me today a very good friend of mine, and we've been working together for a long time, Dr. Michael Bazlinton.
Thank you, Graham. Good afternoon.
Hi, good to see you. I can't even remember whether we first met through the public health collaboration or through Twitter. Can you?
I think it was the hair group, the hyperinsulinemia group.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I remember you'd sort of sent an email out about getting some sort of more specific blood testing done. And I was just starting out doing exactly that. So
brilliant. Yeah. Yes, I remember it well, as the song goes.
The rest is history.
So Michael and I have been working together for what, almost a couple of years now?
I think it must have been sort of 2018 or some sort of autumn of 2018 into 2019.
And it's been, for me, a really rewarding professional partnership, because I don't think anyone can do everything. And I'm good at what I'm good at, but I'm really delighted to bring your expertise in when it comes to the blood tests. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So
yes.
Just tell us a little bit about yourself, Michael, because you're a conventionally trained medical doctor and GP, but you've also taken, like so many of us, an alternative path. So tell us a bit about that. How did you end up here?
Yeah, the story. How did I get to where I am? So, yeah, I guess it's going back. My father was a dentist and my mother was a midwife, nurse trained. And so my father particularly was very interested in nutrition. In a sort of preventative, he was a preventative sort of dentist, if you like, was very keen on instructing people on the basics. So he would sort of relay his day at the dinner table and his wish that people could learn to look after their health better, starting with the top of the gut, if you like, the mouth. And then I remember, I think my first interest I was keen on sports, so I was keen on sort of nutrition and cycling. I did a GCSE biology project on vitamin E. So that would have been in the sort of late or early 1990s, I guess. But actually, when it came to A levels, I ended up doing more of the physical sciences. So I did maths and physics and geography. So doing medicine wasn't on the option. You know, we cut ourselves off, don't we, in the UK very early on.
Yeah, yes.
And I was certainly a generalist and interested in lots of things, possibly apart from languages, which I was pretty rubbish at, to be honest. But I, really enjoyed my maths and physics and the physical sciences and geography. They did a module in meteorology, which was, absolutely fascinating and very, I think, a lot related to sort of metabolic health and energy. And so anyway, so I did the wrong A levels, if you like, and ended up doing starting an engineering degree. But within the first sort of half of the year, I realized that it probably wasn't right, wasn't for me. So actually decided to go to rethink. And I had to do chemistry A level sort of part-time whilst, applying to medical school. So I sort of had quite an unsettling period of life. Not quite sure what I wanted to do, but so I switched to medicine and successfully got placed up at Leeds. But I think it's interesting where I am now with all the sort of the data analysis of the blood testing is it's pretty close to the root cause.
As you were thinking, I was thinking Ted Nyman.
Yes, exactly.
Dr. Ivor Cummins, engineering background.
Yes.
Peter Attia's got about 20 different degrees before he went on to do medicine. And I think that thinking and that kind of data-driven approach must inform where you are now. So it does. It wasn't wasted, was it? It was actually.
It wasn't wasted, no, completely. And I think one of the issues the medical degree was actually more of a language degree which is my weakness, where you learn lots of words and you learn how to use them, and you learn how to use them in certain patterns, which mean certain things. And there's so many of these words that you have to learn and meanings. There actually isn't much time to understand why you're using them. And perhaps that's a bit disingenuous to the sort of undergraduate medical schooling. But I was just shocked. I thought when I went to do medicine, I would be doing an applied engineering degree, really, applied to the human body. But it just wasn't. It wasn't that. And a lot of, you don't need maths or physics to get, as a prerequisite for engineering, for medicine. You need chemistry. So people studying medicine haven't necessarily got that mathematical background or that science, that sort of physics background. It's more biology, chemistry.
Yeah.
Anyway, so not wasted. And this is, I think, why I've kind of ended up where I am, which is very much sort of much more analytical, much more black and white, engineering of the sort of metabolic system in the human body, which I love. And so not wasted. A little bit unsettling, that phase of life, but looking back, I'm glad I did what I did and where I am now.
And while you were talking, it also brought to mind Weston A. Price, the famous Canadian dentist, who at the turn of the century described everything you want to know about ultra-processed foods and the effects of it.
Yes.
And he obviously had the advantage that it was possible still to find population centres where an area around a port had been invaded by Western diet and Western lifestyle. And these were people of an ethnic origin with a sort of Westernized lifestyle, fat, sick, ill, and terrible teeth. And because the local infrastructure was poor, you go 10 miles up the road and they'd be leading a very traditional kind of lifestyle, moving in a natural way, eating in a natural way. And guess what? Great physical health and great teeth. So there's actually quite a long tradition of, you don't hear it too much these days with dentists having that holistic view, or indeed any profession, and my own included. But he was an absolute inspiration and still is an inspiration to many of us in the things that he discovered.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? That so I went into conventional medicine, did a degree, ended up in general practice, and was fairly stuck into that in, I guess, 2013, 14, when my father shared Robert Luswig, who I think you've interviewed him, haven't you? Yeah. Shared I think it came up in one of the dental magazines, his YouTube video.
Sugar the Bitter Truth?
Yes, that went, 12 million views or something. So he shared that with me at a time. I remember when the senior lead for diabetes in the practice, we were finding lots of patients with deranged liver function tests. So we were writing to the gastroenterologist, what should we do with these? Should they all, is this, a hepatitis sort of epidemic, or is this something else going on? And then that Dad shared that video, which Robert Luswig talks about fructose, and fructose causing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in children and adults. And so that was I was like, so that kind of brought my sort of childhood experience together with my sort of current then general practice. That was the next sort of step. And I think once that sort of veil had been removed, that actually, what we eat is absolutely important. It kind of triggered all my interest again, from the sort of nutritional science, from being a teenager and an active kind of cyclist and all of that stuff. And I think the first couple of years of general practice were just getting through the volume of presentations that, you start the job and you're just overwhelmed with the possibilities of people can walk through that door with any problem, and you're meant to have some sort of answer or plan of what to do. So the first 5 years were just, keeping your head above water. But those early sort of 2013, 14 years when starts to realize, put things together in terms of the root cause.
Yeah. Community pharmacy is much the same. Literally, all hell lets loose. Anyone can walk through the door with anything. And that's why I love it. I mean, although my heart is no longer in spooning statins into people, actually the daily interaction with patients who can just turn up with anything. I love it. That's the great bit of the job for me. And I think it's for you. I think so now you've got a kind of a bit of a portfolio career. So just kind of tell people where you're up to now, because you're still not just GPing, but pretty active in the GP role. But you do and all sorts, don't you?
I work too much. I think that's
you definitely do.
I do work too much, and that's something I'm trying to address in the next sort of couple of years. But it's, as we were talking just before we went live, there's lots of, I've got kids who are now in their late teens and mid-teens, and there's university looming up, and expenses, and it's an expensive time of life. So there isn't much of a choice at the moment, but I think long term I need to cut my hours. But having said that, there's a huge amount to learn, and there's lots of opportunity for work. So what I do at the moment is I'm the longest standing partner at my current practice. Two of us joined in 2006, I think 2007, as partners there. And all the others have retired since then. I don't want to get into the political landscape of primary care in the UK, but for various reasons, people have retired and moved on. So I do a 3-day week there. 1 day a week is pretty much admin. So I sort of practice admin, finance, employment, and sort of making sure all our sort of systems are working. So again, a bit more of systems engineering in terms of all of our recourse systems, and making sure all the safety checks are up and running. And so I have some good colleagues, and we all work well as a team. So and we've got a new building, one of these lift buildings, private finance initiative, PFI buildings, cost the taxpayer a lot, but it's great for the community. And so and that's just that suits me. 3 days a week. I do that. So a lot of that work is people I've known for. I mean, I was actually a trainee at that same practice in 2003. So this next summer will be my 20th year at that practice. And so I now know, some of the teenagers who walk through the door and they're 18, 19-year-old, I did their baby checks. So I've known them.
Sorry? That is very special. And I think it's under-recognised, this whole impact of, there's evidence. I know the Royal College of GPs has done studies on, if you've got a continuity of care from the same GP, there's reasonable evidence it has a beneficial effect on your life course. And I'm convinced it's true.
Yeah, and I love that. I enjoy that part of it, and the fact that often I've known their grandparents, and sometimes their grandparents are still alive. So 3 generations of people, and I often, sometimes you'll have a sort of child in their mid-20s who looks like their mother, but actually psychologically they're much more like their father. And then you meet the father, and you think, oh, that's why they're like that. But it puts everything together. Yeah.
And I think again, you don't want to without getting into the politics, I think we're in danger of engineering all of that out.
We are. We have.
It's just about processing people now by whoever is the cheapest or most convenient. And I've never practiced like that. As you know, my partner's a GP. She's never practiced like that, although she's retired recently. And I don't think we talk enough about how important that is. Not just for patients and the public, but also the satisfaction of practitioners, because that is the satisfaction of practicing. And if you take that away, I'm sure that's part of why people are drifting off. It's not necessarily about the money or even necessarily about the burnout. It's being prohibited from practicing the way that gives you the most professional satisfaction.
The problem is the system, as you say, is a good word, engineering it out, because the system really is focused on access and just sheer number. Patients need access. Well, actually, if they have continuity and they feel cared for, maybe their medical needs and demands drops a little bit, and therefore but you don't get rewarded, or you don't get sort of incentivized or encouraged or well done for providing the continuity. So actually if you work to provide continuity, you almost get penalized. And so where we were, it's a tension. So at the end of the day, our funding is based on certain things. So if we don't do them, we don't get funding. We have to close. So we have to do the things we're paid to do, whilst trying to persist and continue to do the things that we might not necessarily be incentivized or paid to do, but we think is good. Yeah. And so far, we've held it together. So far, so good. It hasn't been easy, but because we're all like-minded and driving the same way, that's great. So I'm happy. So in that sense, I see we've made that work. I know people, I see them regularly. I think I will have, the sort of the healthy lifestyle, the nutritional kind of information, advice. I would say most of my patients have had that. So, and some of them are receptive, some less so. And but what I wanted to do was I recognized that actually with the constraints that we were working under and what the future looked like within primary care in the UK and general practice, if I really wanted to sort of explore the whole nutritional sciences and to preventative medicine and lifestyle to the degree and the complexity and the detail that I wanted to, I was never going within my career time, my sort of career and life in general practice in the NHS, that was not going to happen. Yeah. Maybe in the final couple of years, and I wasn't really prepared to wait for that. So it just made sense to work 3 sessions in the NHS and start to actually explore other options and create more of a portfolio career around and include nutrition and blood testing, detailed blood testing in that, which is what I've done. And that's the journey.
So tell us a bit more about BodyMapping Clinic, because one of the reasons I'm so happy referring clients to you, is that I know that they're getting someone with technical expertise, but also somebody who's got the empathy and the understanding of medical training and the background as a GP. So you bring all that together, and I think that's what makes what you provide so special.
Yeah, so it's brings both layers, doesn't it? So with the rest of the week, which involves sort of 2 days plus a Saturday, I work for the company BodyMapping Limited, which we set up with my wife in 2016. So nearly 6 years this September. And so I do also do some urgent care work within that time, which again is more conventional standard GP work in and out of hours next door to an A&E in South Yorkshire, which is in some ways, again, it keeps my more acute clinical GP work alive. So I've got the sort of chronic management of hypertension and cardiovascular disease and cancers, and which I do in my general practice as a partner. But as we have more paramedics and other people doing the acute work, you sort of start worrying that you're going to lose your actual skill base. So by doing a little bit of urgent care work, it doesn't have any of the admin or the kind of the frustration of running a general practice, but it has the one-to-one clinical, has other frustrations, but it is, you're just seeing people face to face, and it is like your community pharmacy where they turn up at A&E and they can have anything, and absolutely anything. So that keeps my sort of acute clinical diagnostic sort of self sharp. And then it also, as we're trying to get the business off the ground, if you like, it enables a bit more of a sort of predictable income. So I probably do about 15 hours, 16 hours of that a week. And then the rest is the body mapping, which is the actual blood testing and sort of health coaching, I suppose. And so, and that's, you sort of joined me sort of 12 months after I'd started doing that. So it's the word, I think it was my wife who thought of the word body mapping. The story of body mapping I'd read, so there was the Robert Luswig, sugar sort of is a potential toxin in fructose. And then that led me to kind of start coming across people like Tim Noakes, Professor Tim Noakes from South Africa. And I read a book called Natural Born Heroes by Christopher McDougall, who'd written another book on running, barefoot running. It's pretty well known. And in his second book, he mentions Tim Noakes and the low carb diet. And so that really triggered my interest in that understanding, as we were seeing more and more diabetics in general practice. And I had this sort of epiphany, moment of kind of knowing that actually I couldn't just do my NHS general practice work. I had to create a company to go and actually focus on this, to generate a sort of a business model where people would come and seek me out to sort of refine and sort of finish, fill in the details that they were missing in other areas that their conventional clinicians weren't providing for them. So from that, I sat down with my wife, who's a great support and sort of co-entrepreneur in many ways, and we just talked. I explained what I was trying to sort of achieve, which was really looking at sort of certain areas in people's lives, whether it be their sort of stress, sleep, nutrition, exercise, and actually put it all together in a sort of break it down to sort of actionable things that they could do to improve in all of those areas. And we came up with the name BodyMapping, which I suppose speaks to the fact that it's a understanding, having a deeper understanding of your body enables you to sort of travel through life with all its challenges, in a better way. So, and it gives people a framework, to give people a framework of what to do and how to act. I think most of us will say, yes, I'd love to do that, but where do I start? What do I do?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know what we would focus on, but 5-6 years down the line, what's happened is we've really sort of for now focused on the blood testing. And partly, as you said earlier, you can't do everything. So that's kind of my area of expertise. I've done a lot of the work. We see a lot of blood tests day to day when we're working with patients, but this was to take it on to the next level and having opportunity to sort of put people in for more specialist testing. And so we found a lab that will do blood testing across the UK. Apart from Southern Ireland, we struggle with that, but Scotland, England, Wales, South, North. So most places people can get to a clinic within 45-minute drive, have a blood test. I get the results. We meet up online and we go through them, understand them in the context, as you said, of their life. So what they're eating, exercise, work, family, and put together some sort of actionable plan of what they to do. So that's the crib of what we're doing in body mapping is to actually, at the moment, is to actually sort of give people a really detailed analysis on their blood work. And then from there, we sort of advise about what their sort of diets might look like, what supplements they should be taking or thinking about, what other testing they might want to do to understand other sort of areas of risk or where they can improve upon their health.
For me, one of the frustrations is that, and I don't think people will be aware of this, GPs are relatively limited in the tests that they're allowed to order. So there's a whole battery of tests, but not all of them are at the behest of the GP. Although, interestingly enough, if you build the right relationship with the local labs, some GPs seem to go beyond the norm. But the example I always give is that I think in medicine, we're guilty of looking at the proximate cause and not the ultimate cause. And the example I give, for example, would be in the case of diabetes, we look at the sugar in the blood, but we don't look at what's raising the sugar. We just look at how can we suppress the sugar with drugs or ultimately with insulin. And I always say to people, if your blood glucose is here and your insulin is here and not much is happening, that's really healthy. But if your blood sugar's down here and your insulin is up here, you're on your way to pre-diabetes, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, call it what you will. We test this. We don't test the insulin. So and I think you can give many, many examples. The same thing, for example, is true in thyroid testing. The actual active version of thyroid is T3. We don't test that. We test, there's a funnel of action, and I won't go into all the technical detail, but we test what's going on up here, but we don't know necessarily how that translates down at the level that really matters.
Yeah.
And my starting point is always to look at the test that the GP's done. And we've got a battery of tests that we can recommend to people that if we've got a willing GP, we can read a lot between the lines. But where you come in is that you and I have spent many hours debating testing, haven't we?
Yes.
So I always say to clients, I try not to spend a single penny more of their money than I have to.
Absolutely.
I try and get them they want to go with the least pain at the least cost. So we can talk about HbA1c or left ventricle, all these technical terms. They don't mean anything in real life, do they? Right? Because your HbA1c is here or up there doesn't mean anything unless you can translate it into, but I feel so much better. My mood's improved, my energy's improved, and ultimately I'm going to live a long and healthy life. So I'm always thinking about what's functional, and the same thing with movement, right? You go to the gym and you exercise that little muscle over there, this little muscle over there. No one actually moves like that. And I always try to get people to when they're going to exercise, to think in terms of functional movement. And so where I think the interpretation of tests comes in is not obsessing about a single metric, which the HbA1c seems to be everyone's obsession. And for a whole variety of reasons that we probably won't discuss today, I think it's a really poor test, just like many of them are. What's the context and what's the total? So I always try to take a balanced scorecard approach to testing, and that's where your tests come in. So maybe at this stage, we can just show people the website. And what we've done over time between us is we've tried to work out what's the minimum number of tests that we can do at the minimum amount of cost to give us a pretty good starting point, rather than thinking, well, let's start off by a £2,000 cost testing regime. How much value do the individual tests offer? So we've between us honed it, haven't we, really? So we've got a basic battery, and then we can add further tests if we think they're indicated and add value. And to me, what's the value added? Sometimes it's a client really wants to know, but from my point of view, if the result of this test is going to change my management of the patient or client, then it's worth having. And if it's not, how much value does it really add?
Yeah. I think, we can certainly have a look in a sec. I think to add to that is it's the value of measurement. As human beings, we've been measuring everything forever, haven't we? Historically, and we love to count, and there is something wired in us to sort of to measure things. And I think within reason, I mean, you can measure too many things, you could argue, but if you measure the right things, then there seems to be this positive feedback in terms of improvement. So again, and we see it in the sort of sports world and sports psychology, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. And that it's the sort of 101 of behavior change. So it sets you up against where you need to be to. Now some people that can be overwhelming and frightening, and they just feel they're going to fail. So if they don't measure it, they don't know that they're failing. Yeah. So you have to bring clients, or we have to all get to a point, ourselves included, really, where we feel comfortable with measuring things, even if it's not the measurement we were hoping for.
Yeah.
And being comfortable with that, and then looking to improve it. And I think sometimes my next challenge is to persuade people to measure, whether it's every 6 months or every 12 months, just to keep coming back and having that testing, so we know where we're at with it. And for some people, in the first 18 months, every 6 months is probably about right. As people settle down and we get to kind of become familiar with what's going on, once a year is probably fine. But then I've probably got a handful of clients who are now onto their sort of third or fourth test, and actually the sort of richness of the information starts to sort of build. So yeah, let's dive in and have a look at the sort of testing we do.
Yeah.
And this is a sort of one, what you do on a sort of first test, which tends to be more than subsequent tests, because after we've done the first one, we know where to focus on. So
yeah.
So shall I try and share my website then? So this is the landing page, if you like, a little bit of information about what we're trying to do. So although we're focusing on blood testing, we're kind of, I suppose, mindful of, the areas in our lives that we need to address to sort of improve and optimize health, so nourishment, cognition, sleep, movement, and rest. So all those 5 areas at some point we kind of touch on with clients. It's not just about diving into blood testing, it's looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of an ethos page of what we do. And where we've kind of landed for my part of how we work alongside of you, all clients get a membership. So where they tracking their health. Again, this comes down to sort of the numbers, measuring things, and actually, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. So we could spend lots of time talking about that and the tools that we use, but we'll quickly move on to the blood testing. So once people have sort of signed up and for their 6 monthly membership, that includes a 20-minute onboarding call. And we've tried, haven't we, Graham? We've tried Google Forms, and we've tried sort of instructions of how to sort of arrange the details of the blood testing. But actually, where we've landed is people just having a 20 minutes with myself. So
it's invaluable. It's like I do an exploratory call with every client before they sign up, so they can see what they're signing up for. And also, I won't take them on if I don't think I can help them. So I think that's crucially important. Yeah.
So within that, they get the 20-minute onboarding call where we go through all of the sort of, how to get the blood tests. And I might recommend one that's particular to them and their history. And that's the most efficient. It's 20 minutes of my time, but it's time well spent.
Yeah.
So under the more info, we've got the individual pricing. So we've tried packages with different savings. And again, it's just too much information. People sort of get a little bit overwhelmed by what they do or don't need. So trying to keep things simple, we go for everyone has a 39 blood marker of health. And most people on their first blood testing will also have this advanced panel.
Yeah.
I think once you're into the membership scheme, this is now 200 and this is down to 160. So I've put the prices down a little bit.
There are packages for, we won't go into the weeds with it, but you do a package for ProLongevity clients, which I think is fantastic value. Because when I first started out, I was using the doctor's laboratory, and I reckon if they went through TDL, I mean, they do good tests, but it would cost them 2 or 3 times to get the same that they get with using body mapping, and they get your value of a conversation with you as well. So I think it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked on Medichecks. You can buy it online, but I try and keep a little bit less than competitive with Medichecks. But again, even they'll do some finger prick testing, which is not as reliable as the venous samples. Or I think you have to travel to their lab in London, which is probably the TDL lab anyway. So
exactly.
I mean, there is a little bit of a margin on the blood test, which kind of covers the admin and the processing, but it's not. Yeah, it's pretty good value, I think.
It is.
And then, I think the ProLongevity package includes the advanced panel, and it includes the 39 markers, and it includes an hour with me and the 20 minutes and the tracker. And I think we both offer Diet Doctor subscription, don't we? So it's a pretty all-encompassing package.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if people want other things, so there are things like cardiac risk profile, and there's a total thyroid panel again. But yeah, it's there if people need it. But again, as you say, we're trying to keep things to an affordable amount. So the other thing with the 39 markers, we get if we click on here, there's a little bit more information about it. You get one of these Blood Smart reports, which is sort of work of Chris Kelly at Nourish, Balance, Thrive. And this is a daisy chain, 4 reports together. I think it's Chris's reports. But we're going to have a look, I think, at yours, aren't we, Graham? So, But yeah, so there's plenty within that. There's plenty of data that's being generated. So people that needn't worry that they're going to be shortchanged with results, that there'll be almost too much.
I think that, and also, okay, so I've got 39 markers and what the hell do I do with it? And I always, when I give talks, I say, Diet Coke's been around for 30 years, during which the time the world's got fatter and more diabetic. And, you could buy a cheap and reliable blood pressure monitor for 20 quid. You've been able to do that for 20 years, during which we've got more hypertensive. And I think Fit now have delivered 100 million devices over the last 10 years while the world's got sicker. So the conclusion clearly is that a combination of Diet Coke, Fitbit and blood pressure monitors makes you ill.
Right.
Of course it doesn't, but the point is it doesn't solve the problem. If the data alone was going to solve the problem, that would have happened by now. And I'm convinced that you need data, but you need some kind of interpretive guide.
Yes.
And the AI is not yet clever enough. I mean, we're working, as you know, on an AI version of our program.
Right.
But it's going to be a while before you can have and obviously that will make it much cheaper and much easier to scale. We're not there yet, where people can reliably do that and get the interpretation and then know what to do next. Yeah. So what I thought we might do is actually look at my bloods.
Yeah.
Because the results were not perfect.
No.
And what interpretation did we put on them? And then what happened next and where am I now? So over to you, Doc.
Yeah, okay. I have just here somewhere. Technology. And what I've done, actually, I've split the screen. So let's see how this works, and we can see the results next to each other. So,
God, we've managed to work technology between us. That's remarkable.
So I put them side by side. I thought that worked quite well.
Yeah.
So basically, Nationwide Pathology is the lab that I use. So this is your sort of raw data, if you like. So you had this back in December 20.
And I know before you say it, I know we're due for a second set of tests. So.
Well, I think we're due for the third test, aren't we? But you missed it. No, life is busy, so no stress. So
the numbers come out very small on the screen, so probably best to I think they probably will. So you might want to just tell people what they're looking at. Do
you want me to? There we go. It's just gone blank. There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
That's better. So I tend to look at, to be honest, the profile one. So this is the 39 markers first, and then go back and look at the specialist thing. So with a client, what I would do is look at let me just put so it doesn't jump so much. Let's put that enable scrolling. Okay, so I would tend to look at this profile one, which is the 39 markers. I think I'm going to change it to primary healthcare markers, but that's for the future. Anyway, for now, they're the 39 markers.
Yeah.
And these are kind of tests that your GP will run. So pretty basic, but we've been doing them for decades now. We've got huge amounts of data about them, and they're. I mean, I think someone was telling me, I was reading that the bone marrow produces something like 500 million red blood cells a second, or 5 million. So
insane.
It's insane. It's insane, and yet we have this ability to measure the finite details of them.
Yeah,
and it's a really good window onto your bone health, and your bone health is related to your nutritional health. So it's this wealth of it's like diving into a pool of pure data bliss. So it's just so basically, most of us have heard whether we're anemic or not, and hemoglobin is the measure of anemia or not, and you weren't anemic. But then we start asking, well, what size was your average red blood cell? What size? How much hemoglobin on average? What was a mean cell MCH? Mean cell hemoglobin per cell. So
I think your screen might have frozen because
there we go. Has it caught up?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
You have to go slowly. Yeah. So huge amounts of information, which I won't dwell on because it's detailed, but you can see.
Just pick out a couple of edited highlights. Yeah.
So so for example, one thing we might be interested for you, who's someone who's interested in their metabolic health, for example, is the ALT and AST, which is a measure of liver function.
Yeah.
And gamma GT, which was all really, really good for you. So that was a really plus.
Yeah.
However, we look further down, and this ferritin, this measure of iron, which then feeds back into our sort of understanding of whether you're anemic or not, was quite high.
Yeah.
So which can cause inflammation. And so you have what we call sort of iron overload, or borderline iron overload. So that, that's the sort of things we're picking out of this data. I'll come on to the cholesterol in a little bit.
Oh, my cholesterol's high. I'm going to die of a heart attack, Dr. Michael.
Well, yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I tend to leave it. If someone comes back with lipids like this, it panics them and their GP, and they want to spend the whole time talking about it. But actually, I'm less interested in this than I ever used to be. Although it is important. I'm more interested in your ferritin, for example, which I know Ivor Cummins he did quite a good series on iron overload and iron deficiency as well. So for women, they tend to become iron deficient. Men tend to be iron overloaded, but it works both ways. Yep. So, but can I show you the Blood Smart analysis of that? Because the Blood Smart tends to it takes these 39 markers and puts them in. I don't think this is a very user-friendly way of interpreting the data.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do is we get rid of that for a bit. We put them through this AI system, which is, I take your point, Graham, AI is a long way off of where we need to be. But for me as a clinician, it's a useful way of rapidly summarizing and seeing things.
Yeah.
And to be honest, what we're going to look at now isn't AI. It's just a summary of the details. So if we look at these 39 markers here, perhaps we should change it to UK money. Standard. There we go. You'll recognize the numbers better then. So this is where we get some lovely kind of descriptive and graphical bars of where we need to be. And this is where I spend most of the time with clients, going through explaining why their glucose might be high and what we can do about it. So perhaps we should focus on the liver, the glucose, and the ferritin.
Yeah, let's do that. And then let's just circle back and talk about the lipids and CAC.
So what I would do is I'd say, look, Graham, your fasting glucose is pretty good. Diabetes, fasting glucose of 7 is diagnostic of diabetes and above. You're well off that. But you're it's just a little bit, perhaps if it was a little bit lower, that'd be fine. But it's pretty good. So it's pretty good. Yeah. I'd be pretty happy with that. You don't look like a diabetic. Doesn't look like you're going to be one anytime soon. But what I would be interested in knowing is how much insulin is that costing you to keep your glucose at 5.3?
Absolutely. As I was saying before, it's if glucose is here and insulin is nice and low, that's great. But if glucose here and insulin is up there, you're on the journey, aren't you? Yes.
So we do this. So we measure your insulin, and that's on the other.
And importantly, this is not a test that GPs can do. So this is an example of which really does add value.
Yeah, So your insulin levels were, again, they weren't too bad. 4.96 are pretty good. But when we look at something called HOMA IR, which compares the insulin and the glucose, I think you came at 1.2, didn't you? So just slightly
resistant.
Yeah, slightly resistant, which kind of fits your before. You would probably agree with that, according to your before you were enlightened. You're probably a little bit heavier and.
Yeah. Most of my life, I didn't exercise. I ate what I thought was a healthy diet, didn't sleep very well, wasn't bothered about it because I didn't know enough about it. And, I'm 60 odd now, and I'm sure if I'd led a better life sooner, then I'd have been in a better place. But hey ho, all you can do is do what you can at that point. And I'm not unhappy. I'm very happy with the results.
So actually, we'd probably say to you, look, you're doing fine, but make sure you're not going over the top in your in your carb and your sugar intake. So keep it to what it is.
Yeah.
One thing, the creatinine measurement as a GP, I'd be concerned. Lots of my elderly patients, creatinine is sort of up in the 140s, up here, which is a sign of renal impairment. But actually, which is we deal with in a certain way. But actually, a lot of my other clients who don't have renal impairment, they're otherwise healthy, have quite low creatinines, and that can be a sign of lack of muscle.
Yeah,
and that often is reflected in poor glucose control. So one thing we often talk about is strength training and resistance training to try and maintain muscle mass, which actually feeds into making people more insulin sensitive. So actually, again, you're into the green. So well done. So all those squats are paying off.
Yeah.
And then the liver. So this is where we had a really positive conversation about the health of the liver. So a lot of so this is your ALT, beautifully green, AST green, bone health. Your alkaline phosphatase isn't up. Phosphate, you've got the right amount of vitamin D. Calcium a little bit high, but only just. But all really positive findings. So when we look at, I think your gamma GT, yes, nearly off the scale. So that was a really positive finding. And then one area where we sort of looked at in a little bit more detail was your iron. Yeah. So this ferritin, which carries iron, was a little bit on the high side, and raised ferritin can be related to insulin resistance. So ferritin, I couldn't tell you the mechanism, but higher ferritins are associated with more insulin resistance. And this is the protein that carries iron in the blood. And the more iron you have, the higher your ferritin goes. It can, and this is where trying to interpret your results when we get onto your lipids and your other cardiac markers, where we start worrying a little bit about inflammation, because ferritin is also an acute sort of phase protein. So when the body is a bit inflamed, the ferritin levels go up. I think the thinking behind that is it takes some of the iron out of the circulation, so any bacteria or any they can't get hold of the iron. So a higher ferritin is actually sweeping up some of the iron from the blood. So you've got less. If you look at the amount of iron in the blood, it's okay, but the body's managing that by increasing the ferritin. So the question is this because of inflammation, or is this because of too much iron? I would suspect it's a little bit of both. And did we measure your HS high sensitivity?
Yeah, it was high. From what I can remember, it was tiny.
Was it? So let's have a look. Just going back to your raw data.
1.5, yeah.
1.5. So again, ideally that needs to be below 1. So it's a little bit raised, but it's not. If you were having a pneumonia, it might be 120. So to put it in context, can't find it. Put it in.
Feeling that there was some context here. I think I had what I now suspect was COVID not long before this, and it was before all the COVID testing.
There it is.
In retrospect, I had some of the symptoms.
Yeah.
So I think
that might have put your ferritin up as well.
Yeah.
So again, this is where repeated testing, so you start to see a pattern. And if your ferritin, for example, if your ferritin had gone up, but your HSCRP had gone down, that to me would be sort of confirming. Let me just find that. I may have lost it. I think I might have closed that window. Give me 30 seconds. So so what might have happened is if you had a bit of recovery from COVID and your ferritin was up because of that, then we'd expect the ferritin to be falling back down. But if it doesn't, then that tells us actually that you have got a bit of iron overload, and maybe going and donating some blood might be a good idea.
Yeah.
So that one off. So often, I often say it's a bit like triangulation. One set of results is interesting. 2 begins to paint a bit of direction, but it's not until you have the third set of results that you really know where you stand with everything. So.
And that's one of the things I think that the way the health system works, again, not criticizing my GP colleagues, they're insanely busy. And what I've seen repeatedly with clients is no one takes any action until something goes red.
Yes.
And actually, I've looked at clients where you can see over 3, 4, 5 years, if someone had said, okay, well, let's look at the trajectory here, it's obvious that we're going to end up with a problem.
Yes.
Nothing is done until the point something goes red and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. And actually, and I think this is where GP systems should be improved so that it doesn't just give them the figures, it also calculates the trajectory. And I always say, like a business, right? So if your business has got a balance sheet of 100K in it, that tells you that you've got a business with a balance sheet of 100K, right?
Yes.
If a year ago the same business had a balance sheet with £1 million in it, what is it telling you? Nothing's going well.
No. Exactly.
If it's a startup and a year ago there was £0 in your balance sheet and now there's 100 grand in your balance sheet, that's good news. So and that's not very difficult to understand, and yet we in the NHS don't seem to think like that. So we wait until something's seriously out of whack, it goes red, and then we chuck a load of effort at it without much context or balance, in my view. So I've got really used to reading these tests and looking. I always try and get history of tests for just the reasons that you're saying, which is, what does one-off test tell me? Well, it tells me something, but it doesn't tell me anything like as much as a series over time.
Absolutely. But it's unfortunately, we've kind of trained patients with the same mentality. So it's like, what you're testing, I'm fine. It's like, well, I think you're in the normal range, whatever normal means, but I wonder what you were, last year or where. So absolutely. And this is engineering 101, isn't it? It's sort of rate of change and deceleration, acceleration. Yeah, absolutely. And so, if you're changing faster, does that have a bigger meaning than if you're changing slowly? And so suddenly the level of complexity goes up and the level of time and investment goes up from the patient and from the clinician. But the outcome, if you get that right, is so profoundly more rewarding and better. It's worth. You're right. It's worth the investment. I suppose the concept of pre-diabetes is a little bit, within the NHS. If you're a pre-diabetic, then that's a warning, isn't it? That you're not quite a diabetic, and then you become a diabetic.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised how many people, when I phone them, say, "Oh, actually, you've got a diagnosis of diabetes." How shocked people are. I said, "Well, you have been a pre-diabetic for 10 years or 5 years, but maybe that was my, our team's fault for not." We probably say, "Oh, don't worry, you're just a pre-diabetic," rather than saying,
"Sugar.
Oh my goodness, this is a disaster. The warning signs are on. The bells are ringing. You are a pre-diabetic. That means you're just about to become a diabetic, and if you don't do some drastic changes, you're going to be a diabetic." And I
agree with that, Michael. But I also think, and I often say this, no health professionals have any training in sleep, nutrition, or exercise.
No.
So I know this isn't true for you, and it's certainly not true for me. But if a patient goes to their GP and the GP says they're pre-diabetic, and the patient says, "Okay, what do I do, doc?" There's no drugs. You might be started on metformin, you might not, but there's no drugs. So the GP will say something about, "Well, eat a balanced diet."
Yes.
Or, just eat a little less and exercise. So because there's no training in what to do, GPs are pretty clueless at what do I do with a pre-diabetic, because they're not trained and none of the systems are geared to it. Come back with diabetic, we can really go for it,
I held my hand, probably 10 years ago, I would have said, make sure you have a bowl of porridge. But, that's a low release. Yeah. So I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong.
Exactly.
I don't think we had the category of pre-diabetes then. But
no, it's new.
You're right. And I think, I suppose, having been living, eating, breathing, dreaming, sleep for 5 years, it's difficult, isn't it, to sort of put yourself back in that sort of scenario where, the doctor, for whatever reason, or the nurse just has nothing to offer this patient. So, frightening.
So you end up frightening people, but not empowering them.
Yes.
And that's probably why they go away and then, "Oh, I'm diabetic." But then from the GP's point of view, "Oh, that's fine. I can follow all the nice guidance now. I can start you on metformin and I can add in this and add in that and get lots of payment for all of that. I'm not criticising GPs. This is the way the system works. So let's be very clear. Yeah. They're simply doing what the system makes them do and how they're educated to do it, not because they're bad people or don't care.
Yeah. And sometimes
pharmacy, it's not like just a GP thing, it's all professions.
Yeah. And I think when I was, again, 5 years ago, I was incredibly enthusiastic and passionate, and I still am, but I had more energy then, I think. And I underestimated the effort that some people find. We're not saying this is easy, are we? We're saying this requires knowledge and help and persistence and, episodes of failure and getting re-energizing and failure and so cycles of so it's not easy to do it. And I think I've become much more realistic with people, but no less enthusiastic and passionate. But I've also come to feel that there is an element of patient choice in that, and sometimes it isn't the right time for the patient to start that particular journey, or it's also, they don't have to do it all at once. So it's, I think I'm less, this is simple, straightforward. Here's a sheet, just cut your carbs and within a month, you won't be a diabetic anymore. And there is an element of truth to that.
Yeah.
But actually, I think with, learning the hard way, you sort of realize that it takes time to bring people on board. And you mentioned, I think when we were chatting before, David Unwin, he's just so good at, doing that, sort of bringing people along with him and not overfacing them with information, but just, learning from the patient, learning himself, helping the patient learn from him. So I don't know, how did we get here from there? Where were we? It's just
the testing. So
testing.
Let's go back then. Because I think it'd be worth just talking about what my lipids purported to do and what the NHS would have had me do and what happened next.
Okay, so this is, in the basic panel of 39 markers, we do some basic lipids. And your triglycerides, your total cholesterol for a start was way up, 7.31. So really we get sort of incentivized and advised and encouraged to get the total cholesterol below 5, which I diligently did for many years. With varying amounts of success.
Yeah.
But I didn't truly understand the purpose of what I was doing, really. And so I'm less worried about this. I mean, bear in mind that it's your liver that makes cholesterol, and human beings' livers have been making cholesterol for tens of thousands of years. Can that really be such a bad thing? One has to ask or think to oneself. However, triglycerides are quite an eye-opener onto your sort of metabolic health. So your triglycerides were up.
Yeah.
So
well up.
Yeah, well up. And then your HDLs were not bad, but when compared to your triglycerides, gave you a ratio of 2.83. So in the red. Now this is interesting. You'll notice that if you divide the triglycerides by the HDL, you don't get 2.83. So this is based on the American. We had a whole email thread on this, didn't we? And it's all to do with the
which units you pick. Yeah,
it depends which units you pick, and it's all to do with the density.
Yeah,
but the good with the Blood Smart, this copes with it. So whether we put your units in American, we get the right ratio. So this is. It's too high, which again, I think probably, I don't know whether you've thought much about this since. I suspect this kind of reflects the insulin resistance. Or do you think this?
There's an argument that it's my coffee drinking habit.
So were you, because I had, when I did my last set of bloods about 2 years ago, and I need to have a set of blood tests now. I'd fasted, I think, for 36 hours beforehand.
Right.
And my triglycerides were well up. But that makes complete sense because of the fasting. So had you fasted for a long time or just?
No, I suspect I didn't probably fast for quite long enough, if anything, but I certainly hadn't fasted for a long period. I mean, I just think some people, they just run slightly high glucose, and other people run slightly high trigs.
Yes.
And it is what it is. That's human metabolism. But based on that, you'd be straight on a statin, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I haven't worked out what your 10-year Q-risk score is.
Well, I have. So my Q-risk score is 10 plus. So I should definitely, given my age and given everything else, I should absolutely be on a statin.
Right.
So the next thing that I did, as you know, is I went to see our friendly low-carb cardiologist, Scott Murray.
Yes.
And Scott did a coronary artery calcium score. And I'm not going to talk technically about that, but basically...
Well, should we talk just before you do? Should we do because we did your advanced lipids as well, didn't we?
Yeah. Absolutely, let's do that. Yeah, I forgot.
And then between you having your the advanced you had these advanced lipids, and then
Scott.
So your LP(a) is up. So this is a particular. So let's go back one step. So these are the lipids. So
you need to share.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. There we go. So I have a confession to make about what this is schoolboy error. So I used to think that LDL stood for low density lipids because I was that, but of course it's not. It's low density lipoprotein. So lipids are the fats that you can't dissolve in the blood.
Yeah.
You can't dissolve. Well, fat doesn't mix with water, does it? So in order to transport the fat in the blood, the lipids, you have to have the lipid attached to a protein, which has got plus and negative charge. Well, it's water soluble, so it dissolves the fat in the blood. So
I sort of think it's like a submarine that goes around the bloodstream and transports the cargo. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So there's a high density lipoprotein.
Yeah.
And we've talked about those. We said this could be a little bit higher. This could be a little bit lower.
Yeah.
And we won't. Well, LDL is what it is.
Yeah.
But actually, your LDL isn't massively high. Is it? I mean, if someone on a lower carb diet. So, but then there is a particular. We do a cardiac risk profile, and one of the lipoproteins it measures is LP(a).
Yeah.
LP(a), about 20% of the population have a genetic tendency to produce it, and it tends to be a little bit more. And I think, again, I think it's a better, not that it's a particularly good one, but it's a better sort of.
It's a much better marker of risk than LDL.
Yes, yeah. So with heart,
it's basically a subset of LDL, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So
that's why you see some. I mean, just to explain. There is no direct relationship between LDL and poor cardiovascular health.
Right, yes.
If you mistake LP(a) for LDL and mix the two up, and you're actually looking at LP(a), then there is a risk. So the two,
there is association.
Just like there is something around, cholesterol isn't the root cause of any of the problems.
No.
Cholesterol is involved in the sense of these mechanisms transport the cholesterol.
Yeah, it's associated.
It's an association, yeah. But raised LP(a), now you're starting to talk turkey on this is definitely elevated cardiovascular risk.
Yeah, and then this LP(PLA2) or plaque test is again, it's not a true measure of oxidized lipid. So I think where we probably agree, Graham, is that there is, one of the, and probably Malcolm Kendrick, to some extent, the causes of heart disease are multiple.
Yeah.
But it tends to be all around inflammation. So there are multiple things that causes inflammation, and inflammation in the arteries tends to cause damage, and then the repair process is what we know as atherosclerosis. So if we can measure evidence of damage or the process of damage, which at this sort of cellular level is oxidization, a bit like rust, rust
in an engine. Absolutely.
Rust in an engine. Rust, oxygen mixes with iron and becomes rusty. Yeah. And it's a bit like that in our blood. Too much oxygen mixing with the wrong things causes inflammation and damage. And this is a proxy test for that.
Yep.
So it's not a direct measure of oxidized lipids, but it's close. So yours, again, put you up into the sort of high risk above 635 at 790. So actually, I think you're a bit down about these, weren't you?
Well, I knew that I hadn't led a good life, for a lot of my life. So I thought, well, I've just paid the price for not what I'm doing now, but what I've done in the preceding 40 years, On the other hand lies for living. So
yes,
I thought, okay, well, let's just see how much damage there really is. And if I really have got damaged arteries, then I'm going to have to absolutely hammer on every possible nail that might reduce my risk. The raised homocysteine, I mean, it's not a good pattern. But I'm a great example of don't over-rely on proxy markers, because when I came to the coronary artery calcium score, there was basically no calcification.
Yeah.
So my conclusion is keep doing what you're doing, Graham.
Yes. Do you think, because you were taking, because when did you start sort of, we put a supplement sort of package together, didn't we, for you?
Yeah. And I've taken it ever since, actually.
Yeah. So, I mean, what was the time between starting the supplements and having the calcium score?
There wasn't much of a gap. Okay. Not long after I saw you, I went to see Scott.
Okay.
It was within weeks.
Okay. Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now good. To see whether things have improved or not. So I suppose we'll have to do another tour at some point and see whether anything's improved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, but I think there is some case studies, isn't there, of people's calcium scores reducing, but yeah. I think it's still early days yet for, the question is, can you reduce the calcium? And I mean, my sort of approach, I suppose, in someone like yourself is maximizing the antioxidant properties of the supplements in your food.
Yeah.
The homocysteine requires the right B12 and B vitamins. And all the other sort of, as we said, lifestyle modifications, sleep, food, rest, reducing stress. So it's not rocket science. It's stuff we'd all probably agree to. But I think when we all have always see, however much resource you have, we all have the same number of hours in the day. And actually a lot of these changes require time. So most of us, it's a challenge for all of us, whatever our level of resource, and trying to sort of not sell people very expensive tests when actually the solution is more sleep.
Absolutely. So we're coming towards the end, but I just wanted to explore a little bit more on longevity. So we call ProLongevity longevity. We deliberately used that word for a reason. We didn't call it lose weight. We didn't call it reverse diabetes. Because what interests me most, and I think this is what all of us should focus upon, isn't what my lipids are, but all-cause mortality.
Yeah.
In other words, can I live longer in good health? I don't think anything else is a meaningful metric.
No.
And I would argue that many of the measures that we have, the proxy measures, don't measure that at all.
No.
And in fact, you may end up with a net reduction in health and longevity if you follow the orthodoxy. And I would argue, without getting into the statin debate, that many people taking a statin for the wrong reasons are probably going to do more harm than good. And it certainly isn't going to make them live healthy for longer. And I think you can kind of measure longevity in two ways. And I've thought about this recently. We went to a friend's 60th birthday. So we were all 60-something in the room. But if you'd been like a Martian hovering above this group of people, what you would have seen was two very distinct groups of people, one of whom were apparently around the age of 40, slim, fit, healthy, and vibrant. Another group of them would have been about the age of 80, overweight, and just generally looking not very healthy and exhausted. But we were all around 60. But there was almost a 20 to 40 year age gap if you just measured it by how these people look and feel. Which leads me to this, that we know that the principal risk of pretty much any disease is aging. But it's not as simple as that. So you can measure age in the distance between today and the day you were born. But you can look at two 80-year-olds and the difference between them is astonishing and nothing to do with age. So the question then is, okay, are there objective clinical biometric measures of aging that we have? And if we can we do anything about it? What's your take on all of that?
Yes. It's just, yeah, absolutely, Graham, isn't it? So true. And I think, so one of the sad things of being the GP that I've been for 20 years in the same practice, I've now, some of the people who I sort of knew in their mid 50s, I mean, they're not dying, they're very frail in their mid 70s.
Yeah.
Or they've got dementia.
Yeah.
And I get quite, it is sad because they're kind of not really friends, but they're people who I've known and I've known their life story and they're just sort of, so I think I can't, and I'm totally aligned with what you do. And if you hadn't have chosen the name longevity, I might have been tempted to choose the name longevity because I think it's so good. It is such a, because we all can say, yes, that sounds what I want. And I think this is, again, Peter Attia, Dr. Peter Attia is excellent on this. And he's, blow your brains out with some of the, he's a fountain of information on it. But, and he's very clear. This is not about, if your parents, died in their mid 80s, then, genetically, the length of our life is probably pretty set, and we can probably push it a couple of years. But he's very clear that it's not really about, we're not talking about people living to 180. I don't think, I don't know. I just think that's beyond certainly my knowledge and what I understand the current knowledge to be. So what we're talking about is actually reaching your kind of genetic potential for lifespan.
Yeah.
Plus a bit more maybe.
Yeah.
But not becoming frail within that until the last year or months.
Yeah.
So actually, and Peter Attia calls this, I think, calls it squaring the longevity curve.
Mm-hmm.
And because what you're trying to avoid is this kind of terminal decline from your 50s right the way to your sort of 90s, where you actually have no sense of well-being in that time. Yeah. And that's what you're describing at this party, isn't it? This gathering. You're all there, you're all alive. But some of you have got more life and health than others. And I did some work with Anthony and Ian Whittington, the Fixing Dad brothers from the BBC Two documentary.
That's inspiring if you haven't seen it, and we'll link to that.
Yes, let's link to that. So Jeff was a mess, their father, and he was declining, couldn't walk very far, and was going to need care. And we did some work a couple of years later, and he was there, fit and well. He was doing the driving. He was helping the boys, his sons, out with carrying the camera equipment. And he was, he was positive and chatting, and he didn't have dementia. And he was, climbing. And he was still. I mean, he was far, far fitter and healthier than he was 5 years ago before the they did
absolute revolution. I mean, this guy was literally dying in front of your eyes.
Yes.
And then he wasn't, and it was just amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I know, that watch it. It's fantastic, and we'll link to it. It's available on YouTube. So I think, so your question was, what do I think, and can we measure it? So I think, yes, longevity in terms of health span and squaring the curve of, away from decline. So we actually, and perhaps we can link, Peter, he does a 5-minute intro on.
Yeah, we'll link to ProLongevity. Yeah. I'll also link to the Nourish Balance Thrive stuff on that. So they'll be able to. Yeah.
So improving strength, fitness, stamina, cognition, absolutely can actually push our health span. So we're actually healthy and actually we're useful and we can help people and we can enjoy life right up into our 80s and 90s. Absolutely. So in terms of measuring it, yes, so within the dashboard that we were looking at for the Blood Smart dashboard with Nourish, Balance, Thrive, there is a Pheno-age measurement, which takes some basic markers. And essentially, it's as DNA ages, it gets damaged. And as it gets repaired. So by measuring the amount of damage to DNA, you can work out how long it's been around because of how much repair on average it would look like. And then Chris has done some woo-woo with his with his coding and has taken all of that. So when you put on your basic markers, because this is the work, the Pheno-age, basically they looked at the population where they'd done the DNA work, and then they looked at same population with their standard blood work. So actually, you can actually match the standard blood work with the more sophisticated and expensive DNA analysis. So we can just use basic blood work to get an idea of what the biological age. Because as we biologically age, I mean, you've got your DNA, but then also you've got your blood cells. And as we discussed, they are a really good marker of health. Yeah. We can actually relate some basic blood test markers to actually what your biological age is. And it's remarkably accurate. And so when I sort of play a game where we have a client and we say, well, what do you think your Pheno-age is? And how close they are to it. And is their Pheno-age, so their biological age, is it greater or less than their chronological age?
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm just at the beginning of this journey, and hopefully some of my clients will be still with me in 20 years' time, and we'll have been able to sort of cap their biological progress slower than their chronological slowness.
Yeah. Whether
that will then translate into sort of a healthier health span and lifestyle, I hope. And but that's why I'm in it, to see what the future holds for those people and do the best for them and try and help themselves to have a sort of long and healthy life.
Do you follow David Sinclair at all?
I know of David Sinclair. Yeah, I think it was David, or Steve Horvath who did the Pheno-age. But yeah, David Sinclair, I'm aware of.
The one who came up with the clock, the aging clock.
Epigenetic clock.
Epigenetic clock, which, as you say, looks at methylation. So it's about how your DNA is coiled and repaired. And
yes.
We'll link to his TED talk.
Yes. So it was. I think it was his work that Stephen Horvath took to create the Pheno-age.
Yeah.
I'm ready to be corrected on that, but I think that's correct. He developed the Pheno-age tool, which then Chris Kelly has taken to put into the Blood Smart calculator. Yeah. So,
and then David Sinclair is the one. He and Peter Attia, I think, now have been a part of some huge startup looking at the whole evidence of aging.
Right.
And what I think is interesting, and we'll kind of finish on this note, really. If you go back 20 years and you think about, 30 years, you think about cancer. It was going to kill you. There was nothing you could do, and it was completely genetic, and there was very little hope.
Yeah.
But if we'd all, as a medical community, and I think there's been very limited progress on cancer, but setting that to one side, some cancers, they've been remarkable progress. Mm. And there's a really good understanding, at least of the cellular processes and ways of turning them off. And if 20, 30 years, everyone had stood to one side and said, nothing we can do, it's genetic, you're going to die, here's some morphine, we wouldn't have advanced. And what I think is inspiring, and I hope right about David, is that he says that aging should be viewed as a disease like every other. Mm-hmm. And if you view it as a disease process and you think, okay, what can we do, A, to understand it, B, reverse it or prevent it, what's the hope? And he's certainly talking about people living in, he's absolutely convinced that the person who's going to live to 150 has already been born.
Right, interesting.
And I hope it's going to be me. So with your support, but yeah, I do think that gives us optimism and hope.
Yes.
And if we lose that, then we've lost everything.
There's always hope.
There's always hope.
Yeah, that's good.
As I often say, I'm in my early 60s now. I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm fitter than ever been. I'm enjoying life more than I ever had. And I want it to keep going.
That's it. And I think it's, it's a bit like Jeff Whittington, the boy's father, who I don't think he's going to live to 150, but the extra, and I think to people listening to this, I think, well, that's probably not going to be, I'm not going to be the one to live to 150, but it doesn't matter, does it? Because actually, if you live to 95, but
and it's been a past, yep,
and you've watched your grandkids grow up, you've seen your great grandchildren, you've actually, you can enjoy a walk, and then you get a pneumonia, fracture a hip, and within 2 months you die, but you're in your late 90s, and your family around you and supporting you. Then I think that's an outcome that all of us can sort of kind of really work towards and support each other, and encourage each other to that, because it's a community thing, isn't it? And I think, so anyone listening to this thinks, oh, that's, it's all too much. It's not. It's entirely achievable, even with what we know now. And as you say, with the additional things that we'll learn in the next 20 years, it will become even more achievable. So and I think that's huge hope for, for everyone, really. And it's, so thank you for working
we'll keep doing this. And on my 100th birthday, we'll reappear.
We'll roll you out.
Sprightly 80-year-old, and we'll see where we are.
Absolutely, Graham. Well, it's been a pleasure. And it still is. So
thanks so much for everything you've done and for all the support you've given ProLongevity over the time. And I'm sure we'll be working together for a long time to come.
All right, Graham.
All the best.
Bye now.
Bye.
If you enjoyed the podcast and want to find out more, join our Wellness and ProLongevity Facebook group. Don't forget to subscribe and follow so you never miss an episode, and maybe share to friends and family who might benefit. Finally, if you think you might need help with diabetes, heart disease, or any of the other diseases we discuss, then book a free consultation with Graham. There's absolutely no charge for this, and we would never put you under any pressure. What do you have to lose? Bye for now, and see you for the next episode.